Carol, you don't have to worry about having the nerdiest answer of the day. About the issue. So I started out in the Army as an enemy prisoner of war interrogator. That's why I had to have Arabic language training, because I was, if we got in war in the Middle East, when the prisoners came in, it was my job to process them and to interrogate them. I got out, went back to graduate school, and I got employed by the National Security Agency because at that time I still had some Arabic language capabilities. I became an intelligence analyst with NSA. I was technically a cryptographer, which means I dealt in the making and breaking of codes. So I was involved in signals intelligence. So as a result of the Nixon years, okay, in 1973, they formed this group called the Church Commission, which was run by Senator Church, and they came out with a laundry list of the way that the Nixon administration and the Johnson administration had mishandled intelligence and used the intelligence apparatus of the country to target U.S. citizens for political reasons. And so they passed, and the recommendation was, and what came out of it was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1974, which limited the amount, what the intelligence community could do. Okay? And Jim, if I'm wrong on any of this, you correct me.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I first went to work at Fort Meade with NSA, probably signals intelligence is the most highly regulated and most highly legislated intelligence discipline. So I walked in, and one of the first places we stopped at was the law library, so to speak. Okay, you had FISA, federal law. You also had the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, by the way, but you had FISA, which is a federal law. You had DOD directives, Department of Defense directives, that filled up many, many bookshelves. You had directives from the Director of Central Intelligence, which filled up many, many bookshelves. And then you had what was called the United States Signals Intelligence Directives, the USIDs, which filled up many, many bookshelves. Now, I am telling you, this room that was full of bookshelves, if you go back there to that closet back there, it would fill this half of this room. Fortunately, they eventually digitized it, and it got a lot easier to access. But the intelligence community was the most heavily regulated, and we had oversight constantly. I had to deal with the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence multiple times where they came up and wanted to see my files. And it wasn't just some congressman or some intern. These were professional staffers. These were lawyers that wanted to come up and go through my stuff. If we ever collected on a U.S. person without some very, very specific court orders, we had to make a report to the Attorney General of the United States. Okay? And we had to brief Congress on a fairly regular basis. And I briefed both the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. So there was a ton of oversight where they made sure we weren't doing anything wrong. We weren't abusing the system. That's all gone. It's all gone. Bill Pulte has no experience in the intelligence community. The law technically says that to be the Director of National Intelligence, you have to have extensive experience in the intelligence community. Now, there's no real definition of extensive, but I'm willing to bet they thought it included any. Okay? He has a track record of using his office where, for some reason, he was responsible for FHA home loans, I think, using that office in order to target the president's political enemies. It terrifies me that he is now the acting director of national intelligence. That terrifies, and it should terrify every single one of you. And that is why we have to flip the House of Representatives at a minimum so that we get Democrats that can issue subpoenas on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, so that we can call them in and make them answer questions which they are not even being asked now. And then when we, a lot of Republicans will say, well, they're just ignoring the subpoenas. Fine, but let them ignore the subpoenas. Let them state publicly they refuse to answer the questions, and that's an answer in and of itself. I hope I didn't get too, some people say.
Well, my question really was, is it as bad as it sounds like?
It's as bad as it sounds like. Yeah, it is. And not only that, we know for a fact, and I know some of the people involved, General Donahue was just fired a couple of weeks ago Outstanding officer. I read his, and again, we missed each other just by weeks in a couple of occasions. Never met him, never served with him. But I know the people who held his job, and I worked with the people who he relieved. To hold those jobs and not be a complete train wreck, he had to be an outstanding officer. I don't know why he got fired, but he got fired. There are intelligence officers that I know that have been fired because they did not agree with the administration, which has always been the hallmark of the intelligence community, was that we were,
Already was faulty.
Yeah.
He's already retired.
yeah, and he just fired all of his senior professional staff to get them out of the way so we didn't have to worry about it. So yes, and what that does with the key leaders in our intelligence community, like the FBI director, the CIA director, the director of national intelligence, we are not as safe today as we were a year ago. And there is supposed to be checks and balances in the Congress to argue that. That is not happening.